came very late in Earth's existence. How old is the Earth? At the time that the Montessoris were working in the 40s, scientists thought the Earth was 3 billion years old, and the Montessoris actually devised, where relevant, materials that were based on an age of the Earth as 3 billion years. Now, given that we have other evidence, the scientists say that the Earth is 4.6, or never mind if it's 4.55 or 4.6, let's say 4.5 billion years old. How long have human beings been on the Earth? Do we mean our species? Our species has only been here. Again, estimates vary a bit, so let's say more than 200,000 years, maybe 300,000 years. What's 300,000 years compared to 4.5 billion years? That's for our species. Then, if you want to talk about our genus, because we're Homo sapiens as a species, but Homo is telling us that's the genus. If you look at if you look at genus Homo, well, yes, let's say between 2 and 3 million years. And what's that? That's a lot more than 2 to 300,000 years, but it's nothing compared to 4.5 billion years. And we have materials to show that. It's clear that those materials were devised in answer to statements like these. All right? Oh, thirdly, Indian children thought that all the heat of the sun, I'm sure they don't think this anymore, Indian children thought that all the heat of the sun was concentrated on their country. Okay, and this is how Mario sums it up. The real big problem was creation, how it came about, what is in the stars, why they're so small, in other words, why do they look so small, why are they so small? They, the children, could not visualize the cosmos or the reality of it, which means their senses would not give them the right answers. Okay? But you can see in the statements and the questions that the children make and ask how much has changed. It's so clear that we've passed from the first plane to the second plane. We can think of the first plane as the age of what? Sometimes people refer to it as the age of facts, okay? With the second plane, we've come to the age of why, or the age of the how and the why, all right? These are the kinds of questions that children always ask. It's as though these children are trying to penetrate below the reality, sometimes to actually understand what the reality is, well, the adults know that, and then they try to penetrate, when it's with familiar realities, below those realities to understand them, right? To understand the processes. So we've also moved from a sort of static thinking to where things are very dynamic. And sometimes, well, in Bergamo we do use those expressions, static and dynamic. You hear Montessori using them in the case of the decimal system, static operations, dynamic operations, you know what they mean. But actually what's so interesting is, take this hidden geography of children's house. Children are offered, let's say, the land and water globe, the sandpaper globe, right? And they look at how the land is distributed over the globe, over the surface of the planet. They automatically think that that's how it is, that's how it was, that's how it always will be. All right? So they live in the time of eternity. But in elementary, it's not like that. We even have little maps that show how differently the land is distributed over the surface of the planet at different times of the Earth's existence. So what seem to be these unchanging continents are more than changing. They really are changing. And even now, when you fly over the Atlantic, I can't give you the actual figures, but it is widening. It's getting wider by a few centimeters each year. Well, obviously in our lifetimes, we don't notice that kind of change. But given enough time, given geological time, makes a huge difference, all right? So oceans can expand, seas can disappear, and then of course, even the land itself changes over time. Mountains rise, mountains are worn down and worn away. Mount Everest, despite all the forces of erosion on Mount Everest, Everest is growing a little bit higher each year because the Indian plate, tectonic plate, is still pushing into the Eurasian tectonic plate, okay? And so what's marvelous is that there's actually nothing static and unchanging about our world, all right? The universe is expanding, right? Earth is actually moving not only around itself and around the sun, but it's actually moving in the universe as well because of the expansion of the universe. Well, we don't worry about that. Anyway, it's a time of dynamism, if you like. How do things change over time? So when you ask questions like how, and you're trying to understand the process, you have to look at a change. You have to look at what's happening over time. All right. The questions obviously reveal how the interests of the children are now thrown outward. Elementary children around the age of 6 are extraordinarily formed individuals. Dr. Montessori even says about a child of 3 that a child of 3 is already an old man to whom we should bow in respect, right? Because of in the incredible amount of learning that's gone on in the first 3 years of life. So imagine, after 6 years of life, how formed and well-informed that individual actually is, all right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't more to find out, more to appreciate, and so on. And these formed little individuals, right, have developed sufficient powers of their own. They have constructed themselves to such a point that now they can throw out the intelligence outward to the universe. Montessori says that the intelligence at this time becomes extroverted. They're not constantly focusing on their physical powers, like mastery of movement and so on. That's been achieved. Or training the senses so that they're ever more acute or that they're ever better observers. That's been achieved. And the sensitive periods for that is gone, or are gone, maybe I should be saying. So the interests change, intelligence is thrown outward. The interest is in everything, absolutely everything. Everything the children have experienced, everything that the children see, even if it's as far away as the stars in the heavens. Okay, so, and everything that the universal cosmos holds. And, as I've already indicated, we can see how that movement that's been so developed and those senses have been so developed, no matter how developed, are no longer enough as a means of exploring this vast environment, right? So there's a lot of things, and what's so beautiful really is that the Montessoris took those questions and statements seriously, so seriously that they started devising materials and presentations, if you like, lessons, so to speak, possibilities of activities for the children, so they really could find answers to their questions at the same time that they were still developing their minds. Okay. So let me just quote myself here. So these older children have already by the age of 6, already acquired the knowledge that permits them to describe their world. That is, they have already acquired knowledge of the world of external experiences. Now, during the second plane, they want the knowledge that permits them to understand the world, how it works, how it functions. And not only that, they also want to understand human society, how that functions. Okay? And these characteristics that the children reveal, Dr. Montessori calls the psychological characteristic a sort of sensitive period for the acquisition of culture. Now, I've already said culture, when she says it here, has to be understood as human knowledge and understanding. So now we think of these children as hungry for knowledge and understanding of the kind that I've just, indicated. When we think of the hunger in the little child, Montessori uses the expression hunger there in relation to words. They're hungry for words. Words, of course, that they understand, they know the meaning, they have the concepts, they know the concepts underlying those words, but still it's a hunger for words, and their vocabulary, their powers of language increase enormously during the first plane. But she uses the word hunger during the second plane for this kind of human knowledge that helps you to understand the world and how it works, to understand human society and how it works, right? And to reach that kind of knowledge and understanding, the children have to explore realities. And remember, if we talk of reality, we're always talking of nature in some sense. And if we talk of the world is nature too. Nature can be understood in many ways, can't it? Okay? The children also want to understand and explore realities that are actually hidden from sight. Okay? Realities that are hidden, that are invisible, but that are realities, fascinate the children at this age. When the children say, how do plants, if we can't see the plants eating and drinking, how can they grow? But that's like saying, surely they are eating and drinking, but we can't see it, right? It's not accessible to the senses, so you can't understand it through the senses. So we have to help, okay? And that's why materials are devised to help the children to use another power that's so important at this age, and that's the power of the imagination. This is to see, not only with the eyes of the body, but also to be able to see with the eyes of the mind. And only the imagination, okay, only the eyes of the mind, permit one to penetrate hidden, invisible realities. All right? And therefore, come back to the example of the food making in plants, which connects with why are the leaves green. We have materials that help the children to understand the process of photosynthesis. Okay? Because the leaves are actually making food for the plant. We may not be able to see it with our naked eyes, but that's what's really going on. And the children can picture it in their minds if we give the right help to the imagination. So the evolution of the approach that's so important at this age is now to help the imagination so that children can picture realities that otherwise remain out of reach. And so much of the work is now mental. Okay? Yes, there's still work for the hands, but so much of it has to do with appealing to the imagination and picturing processes in the mind. So there's an incredible amount of mental activity that goes on at this time, both to understand more deeply realities that have always surrounded us and that have been familiar to us, more or less from the time that we're born, but also, realities which are huge, right, and seem to be completely out of reach. So that's what makes this play, if you like, so fascinating. And made the work. So Montessori refuses to content the teachers when they ask, if we can offer help with geography, biology and history, but they respond to what they come to see, a developmental need on the part of the children. And so we start to offer, geography, biology, history, it's everything to do with human beings and how human societies or human groups evolve over time in the second play. And so we reach cosmic education, but so late in Montessori's life, and where, and this is something I think that's marvelous, since here we are in India, it's actually, really, really, really developed in India, and actually in this part of India. All right. But how, in the end, can this be? One thing I always like to say, can you imagine that we can picture the universe? The power of the imagination is so great that we can picture the imagination, which is so huge and so vast, and we can picture it in this head, which is so small. Don't you think it's extraordinary that something this small can picture something so big? There you are. That's the power of the imagination. And Montessori points out that the children of this age have a kind of sensitivity for the use of the imagination. So they become imaginative explorers. They're not just they don't just use their senses and movement. There's an enrichment here. Don't think of it that there's a substitution. We always need our senses, we always need our movement, but now there's another force, another power that we can use that's an enrichment of how we can actually explore. And then in terms of the evolution of the approach too, now the Montessoris understand better, what we have to offer, how it has to be done, because whatever we offer has to respond in some way to these questions, spoken or unspoken, that are typical of the age, has to appeal to the imagination, so it has to speak to the deep interests of children of this age, see the hunger for knowledge and understanding, and the how, through the imagination, and fortunately, nature has provided the children with this particular power to use the imagination, and we use the imagination not in the interest of fantasy, which is a superficial idea of creativity, okay, but to use the imagination based on reality. We're always interested in reality, just as the first thing people are interested in reality, right? The little children are interested in reality, the adults who work with them understand that. Here, the older children are interested in different kinds of realities, and we want to help the children. And so the role of the adult is absolutely vital. But, it's also limited, because you can only go so far and no further.